Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right here on Liberty Works Radio Network, where liberty works for you. And this is your host, Tom Navolis. And I'm so delighted that you're here these few days before Christmas. And what an exciting time to be able to take and honor what the creator of the universe has done for us individually, by remembering that he sent Jesus Christ to become our Savior. Wow. That just always just takes my mind and breath away every time we come to the season and I begin to think about that. And that the truisms are, when you think about that, all that has occurred, all that is occurring. There's so many things that have happened in the political spectrum, but one of the things that I'd like to step back about a week ago is that we did lose two great people that have great notoriety in different segments and sectors of the world, if you will. One of them being R.C. Sproul, who from a very interesting biblical teacher and one that clearly understood Reformation truth and was very instrumental in educating a great number of people in biblical truth, fundamental to the Reformation. Great loss in that regard. Man that has written a lot of different books and influenced a lot of different people. Surprisingly, some that I never expected that he would have had influence on. And one that I heard during the eulogy process that happened this past Wednesday was that he was very close and connected to Dr. He is connected to D. James Kennedy. And that connection just blew me away, but it shouldn't be unexpected from the fact and reality, and let me turn my phone down here, from that reality that D. James Kennedy was right down there in Florida, and so was R.C. Sproul. So interestingly, they had two different universities approaching very similar perspective. And D. James Kennedy has always been one of my longtime heroes, along with Francis Schaeffer, and really got me to have a clearer understanding of how Christians should be active in society, political realm, and in this nation in total. So Dr. Sproul wasn't that much of an influence to me in that area. I appreciated a number of different things that he did. But I was more in tune with Francis Schaeffer, Dr. Kennedy, Packard, and a whole list of others that I can go back to all the way from the 70s. So who's that other person? Well, the other person is John Kotmair, who started Liberty Works Radio Network. And so when we look at all the things that he has done, in his battle, not only from his clear understanding of the biblical perspective that Christians should be involved in the political arena, but that he was able to be one that took that fight directly to the lion's den and what we would look at as those agencies, in particular the IRS, who fundamentally is not for America. Yeah, I know they are there by virtue of law, but they're lawless in all that they do. And what we've seen also this week is that we have other lawless agencies that now are being held accountable, hopefully, by virtue of what has happened with the whole Bundy Ranch issue, and that it looks like that hopefully, and it's great hopefully, that court case will be dismissed. I'm not one to give a lot on John Kotmair. He sought me out, quite frankly, and invited me to the network. I was and have been honored to be a member of the hosts and hostesses that are part of the Liberty Works Radio Network programming. And so I am very thankful to him for this opportunity that I've had over the last 3 years to be a part of this programming. So there's a lot more on the website. You should go find out about Liberty Works Radio Network. I suggest that there you can find out a whole lot more of the work that John has done in his lifetime. It's a phenomenal lifetime, understanding just not only from what the ills and ilk of the IRS is as a rogue agency so many different times, but also on the court systems, and that, judges can't make law, but we see that happening over and over and over. And again, it goes according to people's ideologies, which is kind of a place I wanted to go this week in a couple of different ways. One of the ways that I needed to follow up with you is in the area of John Knox Appellation. The appellation, we didn't get a lot of time to cover it last week, and what it was is that, as you may know from history, is that John Knox was basically sentenced to death by the Catholic Church and leadership there in Scotland, and he wasn't around when that would happen, but when he came back, he began to appeal to the different leaders within Scotland to try and say, look, you first and foremost are appointed by God, and your total responsibility is to God first and not to man. So one of the things that I'm ultimately going to do with the appellation is that I'm going to take and look at its application within the constitutional republic, because those of you that have possibly taken the time from last week and went into the resources and references and download it, you're probably getting through about third to a half of it and going, what nutcase stuff is this, and what he's talking about with all these Old Testament references, and that if someone is into idol worship and all of this stuff, that, they're supposed to be put to death, so on and so forth. Well, you have to read the rest and fully the whole appellation to get to the understanding of the New Testament application of that and what it means to come to repentance. So I think the real important aspects that we need to understand from what John Knox is really talking about is that in which I've mentioned to you, and I've talked about to you in the last 3 weeks, is that of the lesser magistrates. And that those that are elected to office, especially what our founders understood, because they understood this, okay? They understood John Knox. They understood the Reformation. They understood what it meant as far as that doctrine of the lesser magistrate. And the way they understood it, and the way that Knox talked about it, and the way that he takes it all the way back to Augustine, which is kind of interesting. I'm going to just for a moment, is that one of the things that Knox talks about at the very end is that what I said a couple weeks ago or last week was that you might as well just wipe Augustine off the map if you don't believe what I've been talking about, because Knox actually calls on Augustine as one of his primary judges of authority within the argument that he makes at the end of the appellation, when he calls on the 3 witnesses and testimonies by which he should be judged innocent of any crimes that were brought upon him. But more importantly is that it comes down to, hey, if you're elected to office, if you're appointed as a judge, our founders really did think and understand that where you should take and have your real source of who you're accountable to, your first sense of accountability is to God, nowhere else. So when I look at the 2 men that I just talked about earlier, R.C. Sproul and John Kotmair, is that they clearly knew that with R.C. in the pulpit as well as being a teacher, theologian, and such, that his first place of accountability was to God. And the same with John. He knew that as well, is that in everything he did in fighting for liberty in this nation, his first place of accountability was to God, and that it was self-governance under those core principles and truths that are biblically sound that we can govern, that we can be just, that we can have justice, that we can understand those types of things. But when you bow down to man, when you bow down even in the corporate world, in the business world, because John Knox even takes it to that level, and he proves it scripturally, is that, you know what? It's not just about you as the lesser magistrates. It's about you and me as the citizens in supporting the lesser magistrate, as well as us in our business activities, that we need to be individually accountable to the living God. And when we do that, yeah, it's really amazing to me that things happen differently. You approach those that you work with differently. The idea of all this sexual assault stuff, geez, that fits right within the 10 Commandments alone. Yeah, you know what? We are all accountable to the living God first and foremost. And I think that more than anything else during these next couple of days as we look at Christmas on Monday is that the remembrance of not all of the give of this, give of that, the gifts, whatever, that's fine, that's dandy, but that's not reality. The reality is that first order of who we have to look to for our very next breath. You see, those two gentlemen, as well as many, many others, they were these two guys famous. There's more like me who are infamous. But the fact is that they were someone that a lot of people looked up to. But you know who's more important in so many different ways are all of those moms and dads, all of those other people that have the ones and twos influences that go to meet their maker and nobody else even knows about it. Kathy and I were talking about that. Is that when we reflect on these famous people that have maybe large numbers of people in attendance, there's so many more that necessarily don't have a lot of people in attendance when they pass. But they were critical to the lives of those that they touch and had touched. Very important to understand and remember that. But most importantly, where the importance of every individual is as we come before the living God, and we do what John Knox called us to do. We do every aspect of what is necessary to repent and come before God, not only individually, but collectively as a community, and then as a state, and then as a nation, because otherwise, John Knox really brings it out. You know what? He talks about it in the Appellation. You can see it all through history, is that governments, people groups do come under judgment. There is that judgment, that greater judgment that can happen when people turn their backs on God. And we've done that in America quite a bit. And that's why I think as we look at, and as we're going to be going into the next segment here in a little while, is that the critical point is to look at a song that says a Savior is born, given to us, predicted within all of that Torah, Old Testament, so that we can have that understanding that the King of Kings came to earth clearly for us as individuals, but then as we as individuals have an effect on all those around us, then that means that we can pronounce that glory of God. And that's what the doctrine of the lesser magistrate says, is that as we proclaim that doctrine of the glory of God as leaders, or as elected officials and as judges, if you understand that and you can promote that and you can deal with that clearly, that then we can understand that God is absolutely sovereign, that he is the one that maintains us and maintains society as a whole, but more importantly, he maintains your family. So come on back in the next segment when Samuel Adams returns and those anti-federalists, yes, they did. They absolutely got it right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns, the Anti-Federalist. They absolutely got it right here on Liberty Works Radio Network, where liberty does work for you. And we already talked about the network a little bit, but I just want to remind you that the network absolutely needs your help. We always do. I mean, it's about you, as I always say. This is a listener-funded network, and we greatly appreciate if you would take and go to that donate button and contribute what you can. But with that, let's go on to what John Knox had been talking about relative to his plea to those lords within the Scottish realm to say, hey, you know what, need some help. Hey, you can't take and live outside of who you are, what you've been created to be, and the real fact that, you know what, you're responsible first and foremost before the living God. Now, isn't that interesting to me? And here's something that becomes even more interesting. So over the last couple of weeks, there's been this whole thing going on about this, what are we calling it now? A tax reduction, a tax bill, something that is supposed to really work for us well. I believe it will. I think that, on a side note, I think that now what we need to do is start whacking a bunch of the agencies to reduce the amount of money that the federal government needs, but having our tax format changed is extremely significant, especially for small corporations, small business, S-corps, LLCs, farms, all of the small businesses that drive America and really employ the majority. Remember, I'm a business consultant as well, and that I've done a lot of work with the SMB environment. That's the small business environment. So, small businesses is what keeps America going. You think that the major corporations are the ones that, employ hundreds of thousands and all of this and all of that. Well, true. There's a lot of people that are employed and they do make a lot of money. But when you look at the greater economy and you go study that, it is small business America that makes our economy thrive. And so when it comes to the middle class tax break, the truth of the matter is the middle class is driven by the SMB environment. That is the S-corps, the LLCs, and so on. So by virtue of that, and by virtue of taking and making those significant changes for the small businesses, like getting rid of the estate tax and the pass-through, reducing the pass-through taxation and all of that, it will help the SMB environment significantly, which is me, you, middle class. So I think that this tax bill, it does an incredible amount right there alone for the SMBs. Plus it gets rid of that death tax issue, as well as it gets rid of the mandate, the individual mandate. And to me, that was extremely critical because, especially for small businesses, when you start hitting that 50 person and the other and individuals and those that are younger that think that they can live forever and not need health insurance, so on and so forth. I'm not going to get into all of that. You can go read it somewhere else online. But what I wanted to comment, and the reason that I was commenting on that, is that what bothers me significantly, and when I was reading and studying this appellation by John Knox, I sit here and it tears at my heart, because not only for those that are elected Republican legislators, those that are in the Republican Party, all the way down to the county level, and then those clearly in the Democrat Party that call themselves Christians. And again, I'm speaking to you Republicans as much as I am to the Democrats. If you call yourself a Christian, then I think you need to understand very clearly that your political life and your political party is not where you are accountable. If you're a Christian and you're a Democrat and you're allowing Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer to dictate your moral mentality, then you have bowed down to evil. I'm just going to call it like I see it. Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are the epitome of what our founding fathers, and Nancy Pelosi twisted that whole idea around this tax legislation with our founding fathers. Our founding fathers would be taking and looking at Nancy Pelosi no different than they looked at the people in Parliament, to the extent that they would be saying, you know what, we need to stand against them. So those, again, especially in the Democratic Party and those in the Republican Party, those in any party, libertarian, so on and so forth, that think that you are a believer, you better go read the Appellation and understand its context to you and what you believe, because you're living, as John Knox would say, you're living and supporting idolatry, murder, and worse. Well, I don't know that there's worse, but all of the other things that he lays out in there, but, murder with abortion, idolatry, all of the other sins and vices. And yes, what we have a right to do, and again, I said it in the first segment, is that I'm going to be taking and looking at, when I take the time to, is to write what the appellation means in constitutional America based on the founders' perspective. Because I really believe that as the doctrine of the lesser magistrate is what actually applies, is that we are supposed to be a moral and virtuous people with moral and virtuous laws, which means then we would have justice. But as I say in the seminar, and as I'm finishing writing the book, which is hitting me over and over, when you go through and you edit something that you're writing to publish, you start to think about it really hard. And what's really been hitting me hard again in here is the morality and the fact and reality that it is within our constitutional right that we can have moral law. Okay? And the moral law is based on the fundamental principles that are brought out in the appellation, that as lesser magistrates, or those that are magistrates, those that are elected to office, those that are placed in the judicial system, have the obligation to stand before God first and foremost, before His morality, before His ruling, before His justice, before all that He has given to mankind. And we're supposed to take and rule according to His principles and truth. We haven't done that in America in a long time. I think that we're starting to move in that direction a little bit. I think that as much as there's a lot of evangelicals that are even slamming on President Trump, that there is a movement within that context of what he's doing, what he's about, those that are around him that are trying to bring back founders' original intent, which includes moral and just laws based on those principles of virtue, both restoring virtue and what that means. So when we see all of these insanities and people are crying out and calling them whatever you want to call abuses, where are they getting their reference point? Where are they getting an understanding of that reference point? As I look and read through the appellation and study it over and over again, I'll tell you, you cannot have your own reference point. You can't. It'll drive you crazy and it drives you in circles if you think you can be your own moral reference point. And if you think that some jock out there or some actor or actress or singer or whatever can be your moral reference point, wow, you've missed it. They can't be. Because you know what? You have so many of them that go into a tailspin. So many of them that even go and commit suicide because they lost hope or whatever, because they had no moral reference of their own. No, I'm sorry to say, that it is the reality of a destructive road that many will go down if they look at anything else as a reference point other than God. So when it comes to governance, this is what our founders understood. This was, as I talk about, the difference many times between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. And as I look at how we're supposed to stand for moral law, we got a lot of work to do, folks. We have a lot of work to do in these agencies. I mean, when we look at what happened with the Bundy Ranch, where you have someone the reason that you had snipers called out on citizens is because the people at the BLM were immoral, and they thought that they knew better than what was constitutionally correct. So there's a lot of different things that are out there. The other thing that I kind of wanted to throw in there as I've been working on my book and answering some other things and some letters and emails that I've gotten from some folks is this whole idea that, I talk about communist and communism. And, I get out there and it's the easy mark, if you will, to say, that these people are communist. Well, I have to go back and look at it and say, no, they're neo-Marxists. So I'm going to start looking at using that terminology a little bit better and trying to clarify it, because remember, it's all about messaging. It's all about the narrative. And what I've been figuring out is that what the neo-Marxists are all about is that they look at now, in particular, under the teachings and theories of this gentleman, Emanuel Wallerstein, or Wallerstein, depending how you want to say it. It's called the World Systems Theory. And what it does is it expands on many of the basic ideas of the dependency theory, which a dependency theory originated with a Hans Singer and a Raoul Presic, and it's a dependency theory in economics which defines the external, and then on a core peripheral, and on a world economy, and all of those types of things. But what it gets down to in this world system is that it argues that nation states should not be the basic unit of socioeconomic analysis at all, but rather international economic systems themselves are a key. Well, in so many ways, that's communism, but it's communism in another light. It's communism in another name. So neo-Marxism then begins to use all of these other ideas in that wrapped around theory. I'm going to cover a little bit of that in the next segment when we get to that. And the reason is because as we look at all of the different aspects of what's happened over all these years, and in particular over the last 100 years in America, wow. It's just been perverted, okay? It's been perverted since those mid-1800s, as I've explained over and over, within the church, within theology alone, within not teaching and understanding even the basics of John Knox and what he was doing in this appellation, not understanding those other reformers and what they taught, and the idea that, yes, we as the church, going all the way back to Augustine, we people and believers have to be accountable to God, and we have to be moral and virtuous, not only in our personal lives, but also in how we act in business and in governance in our families. So come on back in the next segment. We kind of pick up on this neo-Marxism as Samuel Adams returns, and those anti-federalists, yes, they did. They absolutely got it right here on Liberty Works Radio Network, where liberty works for you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this last segment of Samuel Adams Returns. The Anti-Federalists, yes, they did. They got it right here on Liberty Works Radio Network, and this is Tom Navolis, your host, and once again, I'm glad you're sticking with me on this program just before Christmas as we rethink who we are as individuals, and, you know, with the fact you may have had some losses in your personal life recently, or you know someone that did. Most everybody knows someone that did. And as we also remember some of the bigger names within our society, like R.C. Sproul and John Kotmair, that you have to think about your own mortality. And if you don't, wow, what a fool. What a fool if you don't think about your own mortality and then on your own eternity. What does that mean for you? If you don't believe in eternity, then I suggest strongly that you go talk to someone that understands that and can speak to you about that. I mean, you can even contact me at tom@samueladamsreturns.com, and, you know, we can have a conversation as well, because it's probably the most critical thing that you need to understand, especially as we come into Monday and celebrate Christmas and what it's all about. So with that, it takes into that whole consideration again that when you understand that there is a king of the universe, it was a battle cry for the majority of the men that fought for America during the American Revolution out of the northern colonies. It was no king but King Jesus. So, wow. They kind of recognized that King Jesus is it. So that was what was cried out as well when Jesus was born, the King of Kings. So with that, we can look at everything else. You look at what it means that you, if you're an elected official or you're an appointed official, if you're a bureaucrat, if you're in business, if you're a family man or woman, if you're in any capacity whatsoever, one way or another, you fit into that generalized doctrine of the lesser magistrate. I know that many have written, especially in one particular pastor in particular, has written very, very well that it is those people that are elected to office or appointed to office, or, you know, some bureaucrats. But, you know, I take it to what John Knox says in the Appellation, is that it takes it down to you and me, the citizen, down to the individual, and how we respond individually to God's Word. One of the things that I didn't mention in the other two segments that I think is real important to mention is that when John Knox is talking about the magistrate and that relationship to God, it's not something that's just self-contrived. It's not something that you sit there and you go, oh, God, you know, now I know you, yes, I need to bow before you and all of that. No, not at all. What he says in there is no different than Hezekiah, no different than others, no different than himself. And what he tells the Scottish leaders to do is to go study the Scriptures. You know, the only place that you really get to know God is when you study His Word, because it's His revealed Word, so that we can get to know Him. And to be able to understand how God interacts in history. Some people say, He doesn't interact in history and all of that. And that gets into what I was talking about in the last segment on the neo-Marxists. We'll talk about that here again in a second. Well, more than 1 second. But what Knox was talking about is that you can't know God unless you study him for yourself. You find him for yourself. And the best reference for that in understanding his principles, his truths, and how we should interact with other individuals, how we should lead, how we should do business. Yeah, it's all in the scriptures. It's all there for us to know the mind of God as much has been revealed to us so that we can be those moral and virtuous and just leaders in all that we do, from family to nations. So with that, I wanted to jump back a little bit more on this definition because I think it's interesting to understand that if you don't have this clear understanding of who is the King of Kings, who rules the whole universe, if you don't have that capacity to know that that is where our moral guide should come from for our nation, even in our constitutional republic, then what you do is you get something that I was reading in Luke in my study this morning, is that what happens is that when a demon is cast out, so let's say, well, let's just take it for reference and say, okay, the demon was cast out, that we got rid of England, if you will. We brought in a constitutional republic that has this framework that I always talk about, the framework that enables us then to have just laws, a virtuous and moral people. But if that void comes in there and it gets all cleaned up, I really didn't get it initially this morning until I was looking again at the appellation. So that reference to getting rid of the demon isn't just from an individual life, but it is to a national life. So here it is that you get rid of tyranny, because that's what demons are. They're tyrannical, they're despots, they're usurpers. Sounds like getting rid of Obama. So I'm sorry, but that works too. But when you take and you look at what then happened is that we brought in this new framework. And we cleaned up the governments in our states because the constitutions in a lot of the states had to be rewritten and redeveloped and we went through that process. And then going from the Articles of Confederation, which I always thought were kind of interesting, needed a little tweaking, but we ended up with this Constitution of 87, and we built in the Bill of Rights into it so we could take and, kind of frame it up a little bit tighter and clean it up even more. If you don't maintain that, and that's what Franklin said, is that we were supposed to maintain to keep the republic. Could we keep it? Jefferson talked about that. Even Madison, Sam Adams warned. They all warned that we would have to maintain the republic. If you don't maintain that individual, and they didn't mean to maintain it by, here, I elect you and you go do it. No. It was that you and me as individuals have to maintain it. We have to understand it. We have to be inculcated in the truths of it in such a way that then we could support those magistrates, that we can support them to be the moral and virtuous people that needed to be raised up so that they would go to office, and then we could sustain them with it in dealing with all the various things that would come about before them. But, when I read that this morning, I'm sitting here going, that's exactly true. If we clean up this house, we frame it all up, it looks really good, sweep out the floors, that old demon's going to circle right back around, and he's going to go, oh, look at that dandy little house that's over there now. And what's he do? Yeah, Scripture says he goes and gets 7 others even worse than himself, and he brings those into that house. Wow. That was pretty revealing. So when I look at neo-Marxism, so we could look at communism for what it is, and we could say, Marx, okay, wow, that was really aggressive. Marx was total revolutionary. All of that. When I started going through and looking at the definition of neo-Marxism, it includes analytical Marxism. Let's see, academia. Hegelian Marxism. What do we got going on in the media there, Morning Joe and his little communist friend? Oh, Antonio Gramsci's theory of hegemony, or hegemony, as some people, whatever, you can pronounce it. I never get that word right. But, how's that work for all you neoconservatives? Marxist feminism? Well, that speaks to itself. Ecological Marxism? Yeah, let's see. Agenda 21, environmentalism, Paris Accord, so on and so forth. Post-Marxism. I really don't know what that is a whole lot, so I can't say to it, but post-Marxism, does that mean that you put a stamp on it and drop it in the mailbox? I don't know. And then the various critical social theories. The original Frankfurt School, that was a school on economics, the new critical theory, so on and so forth. The critical, this is interesting, pedagogy, and a number of other different aspects and names. In other words, that it is everything that is being taught in academia all the way down into kindergarten that lacks the moral and virtuous context of what our founders intended for our constitutional republic. Now, when I go back and I study all that is required back for early education, let's see, it started with one of the primary textbooks being the Bible. When I do my Samuel Adams representation, when I go out there and speak before folks of Samuel Adams, one of the things I talk about in the education at Harvard during that day of Samuel Adams, one of the first assignments that were given at that time was to be given a chapter, a whole chapter, and in some cases a whole epistle of the New Testament, and sometimes a chapter in the Old Testament, and then to translate it from either the Greek or the Hebrew, or the Latin or the Hebrew, into English. Boy, unless you're doing ancient, language studies, you don't even go close to that anymore. But that was something that Sam Adams had to do in Harvard. So what we have, ladies and gentlemen, is we have all of this neo-Marxism and the different schools of neo-Marxism, the radical political economics. You have all of these other components of it, and we can see them being played out and acted out. So I guess saying that, people are communist, all right, maybe I need to take and review that a little bit. But maybe the only reason I need to review that is because the Hegelian dialectic, the Hegelian Marxism, was so good at changing the narrative in such a way that they can market then what it means to have the ecological Marxism, that being what's going on in environmentalism, feminism, let's see, the analytics, so on and so forth, that we don't have to call it Marxism or communism, because we took the communism and have diced it all up into all of these other isms. So that's why I kind of call it the isms in the book. And what we need to reflect back on is that our founders' full intent was to have a moral and virtuous people. And you know what? The only way we can do that is to finish up today's program where we started. Christmas on Monday is that to remember the birth of Christ, and that he is, as the battle cry was, the King of Kings. He is the King of Kings of all eternity. And my hope for you, more than anything else, is that he's the King of your life. That every decision that you would make as a leader, whether in your home, your business or in your political endeavors, or you as a justice, would do it from the perspective that your accountability is to God first through Christ, and understanding that. So that's what I would hope for you. You see, because that's where real liberty is, and I've always talked about it that way. So as you look at Christmas and you take and you focus on all the joys of it, focus on Christ first, because that's what Sam Adams did, and that's what we're going to do maybe in the future, as really the Anti-Federalists, they got it right here on Liberty Works Radio Network, where liberty works for you.